Check it. Whether it's your first time or you need a retreat, this is your place for video games and fresh beats. LBnMie, LBnMie, Last BeNeVoLeNcE and Kimmie. When I was growing up, I had this really good friend who I hung out with all the time. I mean, we did everything together. We listened to music, played video games, watched anime, even played Dragon Ball Z cards. Like, yeah, I know, I'm pretty sure we were the only nerds alive that actually played Dragon Ball Z cards rather than just collected them. Anyway, this good friend of mine was like a brother to me. He came over just about every weekend, and if he didn't, I went over to his place to hang out. We always had tons of fun, and I'll never forget that. Now, this friend of mine had a younger brother who was different. And when I say different, I mean like 4 times more so than playing Dragon Ball Z cards different. This kid was unique. He was a legend. Not quite sure if this was due to his upbringing or something, but for sure this kid definitely lived in his own world, his own galaxy, his own universe, maybe even his own multiverse. Now, this legendary human being was so incredibly picky when it came to food that 93.75% of the time he would only eat one thing: chicken nuggets. Now, it goes without saying that there's a lot of different kinds of food out there. I've tried food from just about every corner of the world, and let me tell you, chicken nuggets are definitely not even close to the top, to the metaphorical peaks of quality dishes that anyone could enjoy. But that's all he ate. To him, every other kind of food was either almost mediocre or absolutely deplorable. To you food heads out there, hearing that may have been heartbreaking or even offensive, but it's a true story nonetheless, and unfortunately, it was the gaming community that reminded me of this strange memory. I'll get into that later on. Today, we're talking about a game that's different, but maybe not so different in the way that most people would have preferred. This is Babylon's Fall, a sci-fi fantasy action RPG developed by Platinum Games and published by Square Enix for the PC, PS4, and PS5. Now, if you're here to watch yet another video about yet another reviewer bashing the most hated title of 2022, then you may be disappointed. On the other hand, if you're an advocate of honesty when it comes to game journalism and reviews, then you've come to the right place. We're not here to defend Babylon's Fall by any means, but we enjoyed it, and hopefully with this review we can clear some misconceptions about the game. Now, when I first heard about Babylon's Fall, I was really excited because I was intrigued by the concept of teaming up with friends to explore the large dungeon-like floors of this huge fantasy tower that took inspiration from the Bible. I can confirm 100% that the game totally delivered when it came to my expectations. The only deviation from that, however, was that I thought the tower would be so incredibly long that we'd never reach the top until like some future update in a few years or something, seeing as this was a live service game. But without spoiling it, the top of the tower was definitely reachable within the base game, and there were even more areas to explore after that than just what was within the tower. If you've been around on our channel long enough, you know how I feel about character creators, and while this wasn't the worst one that I've seen before, it definitely could use some more variety. It wasn't that the options were bad, there just didn't seem to be enough. It turned out later on that you could unlock more hairstyles and stuff, which is cool, but they weren't able to be colored, which again took away from the variety. The art style for the game takes inspiration from European oil paintings, which took some getting used to at first, but definitely made for some interesting visuals. There are times when it doesn't look so great, and then there are times when it looked fantastic. Overall, though, I think it would have been best to have a toggle for the post-processed oil filter. Kimmie and I are able to play with the graphics turned up to max, so it looks great for us, but I imagine that if someone tried playing this on lower settings, the game's oil filter would probably make it all look like it was covered in mud. The gameplay loop is most easily described as Monster Hunter, but with dungeons. Like Monster Hunter, You have a central hub town where you prepare for quests, buy and sell equipment, and manage your character build. Later in the game, like
24 hours later,
you can even craft loot, upgrade equipment, manage your own class skill tree, and even change the way your character combos attacks with each of the 4 individual weapons that you have equipped. Yep, that's right. There are 4 different weapons that you can have equipped at the same time. Each of those 4 weapons are attached to a specific button on your controller layout. Preferably, it would have been nice to have more weapon types to choose from, especially considering that you have 4 different ones equipped at once. Still, there's a bit of variety when it comes to how they're equipped, because you can not only change the way they combo, but you can also change the way they attack depending on what buttons you equip each weapon to. Most quests are laid out as linear dungeons, but with bosses at the end of them. For those who are familiar, think OG Phantasy Star Online, but with shorter areas. There are also quests that are just gauntlets of mobs, and others that feature a large boss. Quests are easy to join, and the game features crossplay, so friends can play with each other if they're either on PC, PS4, or PS5.
Babylon's Fall is really cool. I honestly don't understand why many people hated this game ever since it was released. But it's funny because while I was reading the negative comments of reviewers on Steam, I noticed that a lot of them only played for a short time. I don't know what's up with that, but I wanna share my opinion on this one. I like this game, and my husband and I have had fun playing it a lot. I like how you have a lot of weapons you can use against the monsters, and how you can change the colors of your armor and your weapons. The loot is amazing too. It gives me a challenge when it comes to building my character and gives me motivation to really grind it out. The gameplay is fast and monsters can be challenging. The different places you explore are fun and they each have their own feel. There are a variety of missions, so you never run out of things to do, and most of all, they're fun to play as well as satisfying to beat. I even like the platforming in this game, even though it was challenging for me to figure out at first.
1, 2, nice!
Not every game is the same, that's why you have to appreciate what it is. As usual, I am more for making and finding cute stuff, or nice armor for my character than anything else, but I noticed that you have more choices when you progress further into the game, which is awesome for me. Again, this makes me want to play more to see what I can find, like in Monster Hunter. I really appreciate the painted looking cutscenes they have and the story that I found to be surprisingly deep. Each character has their own uniqueness and backstory, and the best part about it all is that you can play this with friends.
The story wasn't the best that I've seen in a JRPG, but it was definitely good enough to keep me invested. Besides, a game like this isn't really one you look for a deep story in. Despite that, however, I found myself not only familiar with the characters, but even liking a couple of them. There were times where I was impressed with how much thought was given to the story, and I found myself enjoying it way more than I did in other multiplayer co-op RPGs like Torchlight, Monster Hunter World, or Minecraft Dungeons. It provided clear context to the gameplay through its light world building, and there were some unique parts about the plot that I'd really like to get into, but if I did, it would make it easy for me to spoil the story. For the longest time, it seemed like action RPGs would either be top-down, 2D, or just limited to monster hunting. However, Babylon's Fall manages to pull off something that we haven't seen in a non-MMO multiplayer action RPG in quite some time by giving us linear, instance-based dungeons that contain treasure to find, light puzzles, and even a bit of platforming from a third-person perspective. Oh wait, that's right. There was another multiplayer game that tried this and failed at it, right? Wasn't there? What was that game called again? It was, Dungeons and Dragons, Dark Alliance, that's right. but you couldn't create a character in that game, so sorry, that doesn't count. Anyway, in Babylon's Fall, there are no loot boxes or randomized packages of content that you can purchase with real money. And even though it's a live service game, I didn't once feel like Babylon's Fall lacked in its content or was trying to underhandedly snatch at my wallet. There was even a pretty hefty free update that was rolled out with new areas, a new weapon, new quest types, and new bosses not even a month into the game's release. Plenty of content and plenty of things to do here. But maybe this wasn't what people were looking for in an RPG. Maybe they wanted something more like the Souls games with brutal difficulty and themes about death. Maybe they wanted something more violent or something with more sexualized characters in it.
How violent can we make this thing? Because I'd like to turn that up to 10 or 11 if we could.
Oh, congratulations. How will this prize money help?
Perhaps add that blood that Kimmie requested. Extra gore, extra gore, extra gore.
But for me and Kimmie, we enjoyed our time with Babylon's Fall, and we hope to see it live on to become something similar to Destiny, where it has a strong following and an insurmountable amount of content to enjoy. Personally, I think people didn't like it because there were a ton of journalistic sources as well as reviewers and influencers who spoke negatively of the title before and after it launched. Don't believe me? Well, check this out. Remember at the beginning of the review when I said that Babylon's Fall was a sci-fi fantasy RPG? Most likely you have heard from other sources that it's just another fantasy RPG or even a generic dark fantasy RPG, but that's entirely untrue, which tells me one of two things about the different outlets that reviewed this title. Either they specifically lied to give Babylon's Fall an unfavorable comparison to Elden Ring, which released shortly before it, or they didn't even make it to the end of the game's story to see the plot twist that revealed the true nature of this game before releasing the reviews to their followers.
We're all prisoners of our subjective reality.
Now, I totally acknowledge that I could be wrong. Seriously, maybe it's because I have the unpopular opinion I'm actually incorrect. Maybe opinions are no longer acceptable. That review scores and words from influencers are now the only thing that's valid anymore, whether they're factual or not. Numbers and data are of what's important rather than personal experience and enjoyment. However, I like to think that's not true. I think everyone should be entitled to their own opinion, but that's exactly why I was reminded of the chicken nugget story. See, it seems to me that the popular opinion is becoming more and more narrowed down as the years go by. Like, there are only certain standards that a game has to reach or molds that it has to fit into in order for people to like it. For example, if a game is an RPG, either it has to be open world or it has to be Souls-like in order to be good. A game has to show some sort of blood, gore, or even sexualized characters and explicit or adult themes to be mature enough for adult players to take them seriously. On the other side of the spectrum, indie games should either be incredibly simple or they need to pay homage to retro 8-bit or 16-bit graphics in order for them to be considered attractive or acceptable. Then, when it comes to an action game, it seems like it's more readily accepted if it's a shooter. Otherwise, it's deemed too repetitive. When it comes to a game having an acceptable price model, it either has to be sold for a base price or be free with microtransactions in it. A live service game is just bad if it's not an MMO, right? I'm not saying that a game is automatically considered by most people to be good if it meets any of these criteria, but it has to have at least one of the few generally acceptable qualities to make the cut. At least from what I've seen, that seems to be the popular opinion these days. We might say that we want more variety, but when you think about it, we're really just looking for the same food to eat. What we find acceptable is narrowing down by the year almost. Even for myself, what drew me to the concept of Babylon's Fall was the fact that the level design reminded me of classic Phantasy Star Online areas. For me, I'm going to always come back to what I personally like in games. Again, we're only really looking for the same stuff to consume, whether or not it's wrapped up in the same package. It's like the only thing we can eat are chicken nuggets, just like my old buddy's brother. And if we don't get chicken nuggets, everything else is either barely mediocre or absolutely unacceptable. Listen, I don't mind being the minority in the room. To each his own, I try to respect opinions too. But when I see things like this, I kinda find it rude. This ain't the worst game I've seen in 2022. Influences will tell you something quite different, knowing people will follow them, adopting their opinions. Imagine if people praise this game for being brilliant. A third-person dungeon crawler, 1 in a million. Looters, shooters, and games that try to be like Destiny. Monster Hunter rip-offs and games that lack the recipe that recaptures the gameplay flow of yesterweek. Looting maps and PSO, don't even try to mess with me. Talking about Godfall with that awful story and setting. Babylon's Fall had more content than launch, are you forgetting? And the story was unique and game grind felt unending. Hatred was the feature of this game that was the most upsetting. But I'm glad I'm not programmed by the masses. Glad I had the chance to see the developer's passion to create a co-op dungeon crawler in this fashion. Glad I got to play before it was reduced to ashes. I'm not blind, man, didn't even need to wear glasses when I found the features of the game that were attractive. I'm just glad that I could experience the action of Babylon's Fall before it was reduced to ashes. But I'm so glad that I'm not programmed by the masses. Glad I had the chance to see the developer's passion to create a co-op dungeon crawler in this fashion. Glad I could play before it was reduced to ashes. I'm not blind, man, didn't even need to wear glasses when I saw the features of the game that were attractive. I'm just glad that I could experience the action of Babylon's Fall before it was reduced to ashes.
We're all prisoners of our subjective reality.
Reduced to ashes.
And you like to end up seeing only what you believe. Truth hides behind the thin veil of fact, waiting to tear through.
But one more thing, but one more thing. If you like the review or the rhymes or the vibes, like, hit the bell, tell a friend, and subscribe. We haven't monetized any of our videos. Support our channel, games, music below. Links to those in the description, right above the lyrics that I'm saying. Can't forget to shout out the supporters that are favorites. Proto Bustasaur, my man D. Marquade Davis, Design, OTG, and Ben Romer, all our patrons.